to remind you. So I like that I.
Thank you. So just to say recording so that we can share with other people. A couple of other people got in touch and wanted a recording of today. So that's what that's for. It'll be hosted on the website and I'll send you the link. Okay, going straight over to sharing slides now. So this is what hopefully you've signed up for as part of my Norfolk Leaders Club, our first webinar 101, all about very exciting stuff, the Employment Rights Act. So thank you again for coming along today. Just before we crack on then, we'll come to introductions for you in just a mo, but a huge welcome and thank you always for finding the time in your busy schedules. Quick bit about the Norfolk Leaders Club, if you've not come along to something before. It's, I hesitate to use the term, it's something I'm kind of doing in my spare time to support the sector. From my experience of working in the sector and some of the support I think it can sometimes benefit from. So some webinars, it includes podcasts. My latest podcast, episode 9, came out a couple of weeks ago with Sue from the new U shop in Castle Mall. I'm running an action learning set with a group of leaders over the year, a reflective space, and sauna and support, one of my own particular favourites, where we get together at 8:30 for a short sauna, and it's more coffee and chat than it is sauna if sauna's not your thing. But that's really what comes under the banner of the Norfolk Leaders Club, and it's very much an informal space. There's no membership fees, it is free. There's no expectation of showing up to everything all the time. It is about dipping in and out as suits you and your busy schedules and finding support, particularly connection with peer networks and a space to reflect. And in today's case, a space to learn from other people, including yourselves as well. So if you've been on my workshops, you'll know that we start with the sheep check-in. It's the top of my head chopped off. I can't quite get my angle right. And I apologise for that. I do have a top of my head. Um, it's I have one of those fancy new Zoom cameras that sort of zooms in on you. It's a bit weird. Okay, so anyway, Zoom sheep news. So who would like to tell us how they're feeling today? What sheep are you bringing to today's session?
I'll go first if you want, Rebecca.
Thanks, Victoria.
I'm probably number 8 at the moment, just back from a week of annual leave and about 3 or 4 meetings lined up today, but in a good way, number 8. So it's not it's more of a
Great to hear you've had some annual leave. And
yeah.
number 8 looks like they're bleating, but I don't think you'll bleat throughout today. But
No,
you know,
no.
if you do, we'll understand why. So thank you. Thanks, Victoria. Who's next? Sandra, you can put a number in the chat if you want, or maybe you have.
I think Sandra has put number 4, nice bucket
Okay.
on the head sheep, because I too am just back from annual leave and came back to so much work that I'm still thinking of the sun and sea.
Totally fair with the sun and sea with you there, Sandra. Istanbul am I remembering right? Give us a nod. I think I recall. Oh, that was March. Carly, you jet setter. Okay. Well, in that case, my sympathy for coming back and it all being hard has gone. Istanbul in March, Cape Verde recently. Wonderful. Thanks, Sandra. Okay. Anyone else? You don't have to, but if you want to just share where you're at today.
I
I
think
would like to be number 3 because I want to have this amazing hairstyle, but
Oh, I'm working on it.
aspirational number 3.
Yeah. Yeah. Emma, were you going to say something?
I was going to just say I'm probably between a 1 and a 2, just because I know I'm going on annual leave, but I'm aware I'm feeling reasonably optimistic and energized to get as much stuff done as possible over the next 3 days.
Hence starting at 6 this morning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I probably and the coffee, so I might start flagging at some point.
Okay. We'll keep you with us for this morning. Right. So yeah, thank you ever so much. So we'll crack on. So I think in a moment Lauren's going to say a little bit more about herself, but welcome, Lauren. Really chuffed to have Lauren join us today. Lauren and I go a little way back. Lauren was on my board of non-executive directors when I ran Your Own Place at CIC, so I know her from back in those days. I reckon the best part of a decade has passed since then, but it's just so nice to have stayed in touch with Lauren. And Lauren, as an HR person, it's a bit of a cliche, but I always say Lauren puts the human in HR, and Lauren was very much sort of the person I would pick up the phone to when I kind of was met with a difficult situation, and would give a mixture of empathy, pragmatism, but knowing the law at the same time. And I'd always feel better getting off the phone. So yeah, welcome. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
So today we've done introductions and check-in. Lauren is going to whiz, she's promised not to speak too quickly, through a presentation with what we're calling the highlights of the Employment Rights Act. What really importantly is for me to keep an eye on time, because I want to leave you space for Q&A. So by all means, scribble down your questions, because you've got Lauren here for a sort of precious bit of time today to have to ask your questions. We'll take away some quick reflections and any actions that might stem from that conversation, and I'll tell you what's coming up in the Norfolk Leaders Club. I'll just pause there in case there are just any comments or questions at this point.
Rebecca, are you sharing the slides afterwards?
Absolutely, yeah.
I thought you were, but just want to double check. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so just before I hand over to Lauren, again, if you've been on one of my workshops, you'll be familiar with my scaling statements. So it's an agree, disagree scalar. Disagree is down the left-hand end, the sad face, the ones, and agree is up the far end, the smiley face. There's no right or wrong. This is absolutely a space among friends to talk about where we're at with this. As I understand it, the Employment Rights Act is phased. Not everything has happened. So in that way, you can't be expected to have done everything yet. So I just want to invite you to share where you are between disagree and agree with the statement, I'm ready for the Employment Rights Act. What number might you say is best reflects where you're at with that statement?
I would probably put myself at a 1 at the moment, Rebecca,
Okay.
because I haven't read anything about it, hence coming on here. So hopefully by the end I'll be more up the other end. So just to be completely honest.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Victoria. It's really good to know. So yeah, it feels like this is good timing for you. Thank
Absolutely.
you. So Sandra, apart from going off to Vietnam in a few weeks, a 3 from Sandra. If you can carry on in the chat, Sandra, tell us a little bit perhaps why you're a 3 and what you've done, whilst I go over to Emma and then I'll come back. Emma, where would you find yourself on the line?
I think I'm hoping that as sort of a reasonably sort of cooperative type of team that have been together for a long time, that we're pretty on it anyway from an ethical and fair, equal way of operating. But obviously, I feel like I've been reading lots of bits and pieces about it, but I don't think I've actually formulated exactly what we need to change. And if we did actually get to a point where we can employ someone, I need to make sure that we are absolutely on it, because what we probably accept as a kind of cooperative, flexible way of working, somebody else coming in will not possibly fit into that entirely, which is understandable. So we need to make sure that we're all operating on the same level if we're going to employ somebody new, because obviously it's just sort of transition over the last 6 years, really.
Yeah.
So probably about 1 or 2, really, when in the sense of legally.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Emma. That's really interesting. And those transitions with small organizations and the difference it can be when somebody else comes in, for sure. And Sandra, my chat has gone. Did we have any more from you? So you've updated all policies and contracts with the new changes, robust systems in place. The only bit I've not yet looked into is redundancy changes, trade union reforms. So you're feeling kind of solid, but there's a bit more to do as well, Sandra. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, great. So now I really am going to hand over to Lauren. Lauren is going to do the whole next slide, please, because I'm driving the slides. So Lauren, over to you.
Just to give everyone that sort of COVID reminiscent feeling. Well, next slide, please, Rebecca. Let's start strong with that statement. So thank you, Rebecca, for the lovely introduction, and a little bit about myself here. And you can use the QR code if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. But I've been working as an HR consultant for a number of years, and the majority of organisations that I work with are charities and not-for-profit. So that's my kind of specialist area, and that will be anything from supporting with developing the people strategies and making sure that they're aligned not just to organisation goals but also those values, right through to kind of dealing with people performance absence issues and writing policies and making sure that everyone's processes are in line with employment law, which is a lot of what today's focus will be. I'm also a mediator, so any kind of conflict resolution between employees or anyone that's kind of interacting in organisations, I'll also support with that. And then the next slide is probably slightly arbitrary, but what we'll go through today is just a timeline of those changes, which hopefully you're all roughly familiar with. I'll talk a little bit about some of the changes that you should already have made or have in place because we know that they're coming up. And then also what we do beyond that, how you make sure that it's embedded in your practice day to day. So you're getting the most out of it and your staff can feel sort of valued and included in the changes that are happening. So to begin, I think the next slide is a timeline. Where I've put now, these are the changes that came into effect from April. So hopefully what's listed there are things that you're familiar with. So statutory sick pay and paternity leave being day one rights. Sexual harassment is now afforded whistleblowing protection. So you should have updated the whistleblowing paternity and sick pay policies. There's also been the introduction of the Fair Workers Agency, which is a kind of peripheral relevance. So I'll touch on that a bit, but I won't go into so much detail. And then coming up later in the year, we've got changes to unfair dismissal protections and tribunal timelines, some trade union rights, which Sandra, I think you said is one of the things that you were hoping to look into a bit more, and also increased obligations on employers around sexual harassment and the steps you take to prevent that in the workplace. I've also got a slide on the 2027 updates that have not yet been fully outlined by the government in terms of what expectations are. So just making sure that those are on the radar as things to keep an eye on, because it's not all happening at once. As Rebecca said, it's staged, so it's not a case of tick that box and move on. We need to keep it in mind. So next slide, please. And I'll talk a bit about what is changing or what has already changed. So a big change that you will have heard a lot about is the unfair dismissal rights. I've said unfair dismissal rights from day one, but that's not actually correct. So I've made a mistake in the slide, but I'll change that before we send them out. So unfair dismissal rights will be from 6 months, where they're currently 2 years. And that change is coming into effect from January 2027. And the reason I've put day one there is because what you need to keep in mind is that will happen from the 1st of January and will be retrospective. So anybody that you're employing kind of now will have reached that 6-month employment service requirement by January. So we need to make sure that we're keeping that in mind, because it will change how we handle the employment relationship. There's no changes to automatic unfair dismissal. So that is for things like if someone makes flexible working requests or are asked to take family leave, dismissing someone for those things is automatically unfair, and that won't change. But we are also seeing from January 2027, the upper limit on compensation awarded in successful unfair dismissal claims is being removed, which means unlimited compensation can be offered. So there is a real incentive to make sure that as employers, we're not getting to that point. And also currently, employees, once they leave, have up to 3 months to bring a claim against an organisation. But from October this year, that window is going to be extended to 6 months. So it also means that you have a longer period of uncertainty if there has been a bit of a disagreement in the process of someone leaving, or if they weren't happy at how their employment ended. You've got a longer waiting period before you know that a claim isn't going to be brought against you. Sexual harassment from now is protected under the whistleblowing regulations, which means that employees can't suffer a detriment if they raise a claim of sexual harassment, and they'll be afforded those additional legal protections. And that will include third party sexual harassment as well. So that should be in your policies now. If you have a whistleblowing policy, you should update it to reflect that. And from October 2026, there's also going to be much more emphasis on employers taking all reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment. At the moment, the regulations state take reasonable steps, and this small word all is being added in, and that just means that you have to show that you were doing a lot more. And I'll talk a bit more about that on the next slide. Sick pay and paternity leave from day one, that day one is correct. So, and this is a change that is much easier to instigate. I think most people will have updated their policies to reflect this, but if you haven't, then make sure that you do so. Paternity leave, not such a problem, because I don't think anyone is going to be choosing to start a family on the basis of now having this right from day one instead of having to wait 6 months. But you may see changes to how sick pay is used if staff know that they are going to get paid from day one and not have a waiting period. I mentioned the Fair Workers Agency. Again, I'm not going to go into huge detail about that, but it's a government body that is being set up to be able to enforce fair working rules, making sure that national minimum wage is being paid, that holiday and sickness is being paid properly, and also dealing with the prevention of modern slavery. They will initially be going into what's deemed high risk industries. So industries where they are expecting that people may not be paid fairly. So I don't think that they're going to be coming for the charity sector, particularly early on. But where the charity sector could be more at risk is around things like correct contracts. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on, making sure that if you've got people on 0 hours or casual contracts, or if you have people that are classed as workers or freelancers and perhaps that relationship isn't completely clearly defined, that's where it's worth getting everything in order now and making sure you're comfortable with what those employment status relationships are to protect you from any future concerns. I told you I was going to speak quickly. Hopefully that's not too much information in one go. But next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can embed these changes, which I think is the kind of juicier part of it, really. So firstly, thinking about the fact that unfair dismissal rights will come into place from 6 months instead of staff having to wait 2 years to have those. That obviously means that the probation period becomes much more important, because where you would have had a 2-year period where you could decide if someone was a fit for the organisation and you could part ways with them without there being much risk of tribunal, that period has now shrunk quite significantly. So making sure that you have your probation policy really clearly set out, that you have your processes and your forms are all fit for purpose. And the length of time that you have as a probation period is also going to become important. I think in the sector, it tends to be roughly 3 months as a probation period. I don't know if anyone wants to give me nods or head shakes, or whether you even have probation periods. I'm seeing some nods, that's good. If it's 3 months, then you will generally be okay, because that still gives you time in that 6-month window to extend the probation period if it's not going particularly well, or if you want to part ways, you can give someone notice, and again, you'll still be well under that 6-month period. Some organisations have much longer and tend to go with 6-month probations, and then that's where you get into a risky territory that you can't make any decisions at the end of that period. Alongside that, to make the probation work as effectively as possible, it's worth making sure that your roles are really clearly defined. And I think sometimes this is where it's difficult in small charitable organisations, where everyone pitches in with everything and roles change before the person's even joined. There's new things bolted on and things that they no longer need to do. But making sure that roles and expectations are really clearly set out, because you need to know that within that period of time, you know what you're monitoring, what you're measuring. You'll know whether that person is successful and whether they're meeting the requirements of that role. So even if it's not appropriate to have a job description because the job is too flexible, still making sure there's regular one-to-ones and catch-ups to say, these are what your objectives are, this is what we're measuring you against, and this is how you'll know if you're succeeding. And also making sure that you yourselves or any line managers that have reportees feeding into them are comfortable with the probation process, that they know how to have uncomfortable conversations. There will always be feedback in a probation period that things require improvement or things are required to be done differently. So it's worth having an organizational feedback model that you train everyone in when they join the organization, so everyone is comfortable giving that feedback. You can use ABC model or the BEAR model. You can Google any of these and just have that as your default, so everyone's comfortable giving feedback. And the most important drum that I think HR people always bang on about is make sure that you're keeping the records. If you don't have a standard probation form, just make sure any probation conversations are followed up in email, because if it isn't written down and there are problems further down the line and you need to reference back to it, it's as if it didn't happen. And I do think it's worth also saying that, of course, although there's now this 6-month window that will be referred to a lot, you can make decisions and take action against capability or conduct issues at any point. So even if someone has gone over that 6-month point and then you start to see a drop off in their abilities or their performance, you can still take action. And as long as you've got those records and evidence of a fair process, you should be fine to take whatever action is required. Sickness is going to become a day one right, so you might see an increase in sickness. Hopefully not. I think in the charity sector you probably have more of an issue with presenteeism and people kind of dragging themselves in and working even when you might need to kind of send them home to rest. But the thing that you should have in your policy is clearly defined expectations on what is acceptable attendance. What does acceptable attendance look like, and what is the process if someone falls below that with either repeated short-term absences or long-term absence? And then stick to that policy. The temptation is to just bring the policy out when something's not going well, when suddenly someone has high absence or you're noticing a pattern in someone's absence. Whereas if you just have the process there as standard, it makes it much easier to respond quickly to any issues and offer the appropriate support, because it's not about policing people, it's about trying to get a resolution that keeps people employed in the job and sustaining their attendance. So make sure that you're asking people for self-certificate forms if they've got less than 7 days absence. Make sure that you're doing return to works and talking to people about whether there's anything that can help them maintain their attendance. Doing all of those things as standard is more likely to see an increase. Even just doing return to work interviews tends to see a drop in people taking time off unwell. Making sure that people know they have to call in and speak to someone if they're not well and they're not able to attend, rather than just sort of sending a quick text message. All of those things can help. There's also things that you can consider around prevention. A lot of charities now as standard will have an employee assistance helpline or some kind of wellbeing support that staff can contact and reach out to. That tends to be pretty standard depending on the size of organisation. Less common is more in-depth healthcare provision, where you can get these off-the-shelf providers that will offer cover the cost of prescription, optical appointments, dental appointments. You don't see so much of that because obviously it comes at a cost and budgets are tight, but it can be a real differentiator in recruitment, retention, and it can obviously impact on sickness levels. But if you don't have the budget, you can also look at things like your flexible working policies, because you'll make reasonable adjustments when people are unwell. That's standard practice. But if you have that flexibility in how, when, where people work, they can manage their mental and physical health around their working day. If they have peaks and troughs in when they feel better or more able to do their job, then they can manage that themselves. I'm going to take a breath because I do feel like I'm really talking at you. That you're smiling, so you're still with me. Sexual harassment we've got to. So make sure that you have a sexual harassment policy. If you don't have a standalone policy, you could have references to sexual harassment in your bullying and harassment, or you may have mention of it in a whistleblowing policy as well, now that it's afforded those whistleblowing protections. But it shouldn't just be a token mention of adding, bullying and harassment and sexual harassment, and then tick, that's done. You really need to explain what constitutes sexual harassment, include the provisions about third party harassment as well, and what steps you're going to take in response to any concerns that are brought to you. Have that clearly set out, and then make sure that you are training your staff on that so they know what that looks like as well. Because although the government hasn't produced any specific guidance on what they mean by all reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment, the pretty obvious things are going to be staff training, making sure you have a record that all of your staff have been trained on what constitutes sexual harassment, what their obligations are in preventing that, and what to do if they experience sexual harassment or witness it. And a lot of that is just about making sure that staff feel supported to bring those concerns, that they know that if they're bringing a concern in good faith, even if it ends up being unfounded or there's no further action, that there won't be any penalty to raising a concern. And something I know I've had conversations with several employers about is just making sure that there's space for concerns that might feel small. Often people, we will all have experienced situations where someone just makes you feel uncomfortable and you can't quite put a finger on it. You need your staff to feel confident that they can say that if they're going out to deal with clients or service users or different third parties. If something is making them uncomfortable, they can raise that. Preventative measures can be put in place, even if it's, you don't go to that event alone, or there's a system for calling in afterwards. So really making sure people feel comfortable and supported that you do want to prevent that. The other thing that you can do, which is hopefully familiar with the ways that you work anyway, is including sexual harassment mitigations in your risk assessments. Ahead of a new project or ahead of events or big pieces of work that you're doing, think about where are the risks? Where are there times where people are working off-site or on their own, or any places where it's increased risk, and what can we do to minimize those risks? Again, these are all ways that you would be able to evidence that you are taking steps to prevent it. You're not just waiting for a concern to be raised and then reacting to it. Contracts of employment. This touches on, Sandra, the point you said around trade unions. Updating your contracts of employment to include what the Employment Rights Act is bringing into effect. The main thing, there are a few different union recognitions that are being upped, but you need to make sure all of your staff are aware that they have the right to join a union. And if 10% of your workforce request union membership, then you need to go through that process of recognition. In small organisations, that might be one member of staff requesting to join a union, and then it means you have to consider that process and go through that. The easiest way to do that is to let staff know that they have a right to join a trade union, is to put that in the contract of employment. For existing staff, you can easily circulate a notice about that or add it into a policy or a staff handbook in an appropriate place. But for new starters, you can have that as a contractual clause. The other contractual point that I touched upon earlier is employment status, and making sure you're completely clear on who is a straight up employee, who is self-employed, and who is a worker. And in particular, I often see a discrepancy or a lack of clarity between workers and self-employed. So the postman never knocks on my door and has decided to knock now. I'm just going to ignore him if you hear back. I never get any mail. If you have employees who are there, or if you have freelancers who are attending regularly, it has to be them that attends, perhaps because they're DBS checked or you've given them certain training. It may be the case that they are workers, and that will mean that they have different rights, that they have different requirements and entitlements to holiday, sick pay, in some cases redundancy. So it's really important that you have that status correct, particularly when it gets to the Fair Workers Agency coming in and auditing organisations. That's part of what they're going to look at. So if you have any doubts about the relationships that you have with different people that you work with, you're very welcome to speak to me about that, or you can always look at ACAS. ACAS is a really good website reference to go to, and they have some clear definitions of the different employment status groups. I've probably touched upon the Fair Workers Agency as much as we need to go into here, but the things to like I say, I don't think they're going to be coming for the charity sector particularly quickly because it won't be seen as a high risk industry. But make sure that you are really clear with your holiday records, with your sickness records, because it's very easy to have casual relationships with those when you're a small organization. Someone asks for time off, you say, yeah, that's fine, and you don't necessarily record it anywhere. And also, if you use 0 hours or casual contracts, those can be a bit sticky with making sure that you're accurately recording and paying holiday pay, because they will be entitled to that as well. And just for the national minimum wage compliance, making sure that you check your job adverts, your job descriptions when they're going out, and that they all meet national minimum wage. And that needs to be based on the reality of what people work. So if you have roles that are paid at minimum wage, making sure that you are then covering off any overtime that's worked. Because if someone is regularly working overtime on a minimum wage job and it's unpaid, they're dropping under that limit. Generally speaking, I've put keep for 6 years because generally speaking, with employee records, you would keep those for the duration of employment and then 6 years after the person finishes. So the Fair Workers Agency haven't said how far back they may be checking records, but those are the records that you would be expected to have in place as an employer. Again, I've shared lots of information there, but I'm going to share just a little bit more and then there will be time for questions. So next slide, please. As I said at the beginning, it's a phased rollout, and the government is very good at telling us what changes are going to come into effect and saying more guidance will follow. And then often the guidance comes out a short distance of time from when the change comes into effect. So we don't have more information on these things yet, but largely all really, really positive things. And I think hopefully things that, as Emma, I think you said earlier, you have good working relationships and ethically you're probably doing a lot of this stuff anyway, so it shouldn't be huge impactful changes. There will be increased protections for pregnancy and maternity leave, which I'm sure most people would welcome. There's going to be a change to menopause reporting requirements. These are currently voluntary for large organisations and are likely to become mandatory in 2027. In all likelihood, they will only be mandatory for bigger organisations, but remains to be seen. And this will involve stated action plans of how you are supporting employees that are experiencing menopause. There will no doubt be guidance and templates on what that needs to look like and what that will include. So worth keeping an eye out for that. A bigger change for the charity sector will be lots of increased protections for people on 0 hours contracts or casual contracts, where they will have some increased rights around guaranteed hours, compensation for shift cancellations, or changes to shift. So it's just trying to make that slightly more robust so that it doesn't leave people with kind of no income at all when they were expecting it. So if you use casual contracts or 0 hours contracts, definitely worth keeping an eye out for those changes when they come into effect. Flexible working requests, employers will have an obligation to use very narrowly defined reasons to refuse those requests and must follow a due process where they clearly state what those refusal reasons are. With most organisations I work with, that is already happening because flexible working requests are considered and you want to be fair and you want to explain why they can't be met if they can't be met. So I don't see that being a big impactor. So that is all from me. I've chucked loads of stuff at you. So now is your opportunity to chuck some stuff back at me, if you would like.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Yeah,
I
really good.
personally found that really helpful. You covered an awful lot of ground, but sort of really good with practical examples thrown in, with an understanding for our sector thrown in. So yeah, huge thanks from me. Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes or so, maybe 15 if you've got lots, for questions. Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, the bit that I found really, really kind of interesting, especially with regards to us employing somebody else in the future, is about the probation element, because
Yep.
previously in other roles when I've been in management position, like probation has always been very much controlled by the echelons above and HR, whereas obviously anything going forward will be directly my responsibility and the other directors, but probably mine. So I think what that's sort of given me more confidence, but clearly defined idea that I would do like a 3-month probation, because obviously as a small, not without fairness on it, and setting out lots of training and like supervision whenever required, and then formally 2 weekly and everything else during that period to make sure that that person has completely understood the role, what the expectations are and what the ethos is. But I think 3 months would help really focus that, because the biggest fear we have is about hiring the wrong people, because the amount of energy and time and cost is just horrendous. So, and I suppose I think we always used to traditionally do the 6 months, and then you basically, when they get past the 6 months, then they'd be going, right, oh, right, we're all relaxed now, but obviously you don't. But it does feel a bit like that. But I think considering you said the 6 month point, the 6 months is now 6 months rather than the 2 years. So
yeah.
so that's a huge commitment, isn't it, about with regards to the costings of onboarding somebody. And I absolutely agree with all of these things. I think just as a small organization, the impact is huge. And it
Yeah.
does stop us hiring, which is a real shame. Um, but I suppose but I do think but then at the same point, if we nail it and we get it right, then it's a worthy investment. So it's just always that balance, isn't it? But I think the 3 month point was a really good one.
Yeah. And the other thing to keep in mind is just being really clear on what you're going to measure. Like, what does success in this role look like, and how are we going to know when it's been met? Because if you're really clear on that, you can make sure anyone you hire is really clear on that, so you all know exactly what direction you're pulling in. I think that's the key thing to focus on, really.
And people thrive with clarity of leadership and direction, particularly when you in role, when you don't really know what your job is. And so you're with that clarity and that sort of that 3 months hoving into view. I feel you're much more likely to get the best from that new employee as well, because they know what it is that they're going to be asked to check in about, and what it is, how they're going to be expected to prove themselves. So,
And
I understand the challenges for small organizations, but certainly myself, by putting in an incredibly clear plan in those first 3, and we would up to 6 months as well, it definitely got the best out of people, which was best for them and best for us.
Yeah, and because we need people that can really work on their own initiative. So that's and risk assessing. So the other thing, when you said about the sexual harassment policy, obviously we risk assess. We have a lot of people we work with who come with some safeguarding and other issues, and sometimes we are lone working. But if we ever look at the risk assessment, we don't think it is, then we would always do it differently initially, but until we've done our own assessment of what is actually the real risks or what are perceived risks. But that was all really useful, and I didn't find it too fast at all. I found it very concise,
Thanks, Emma.
and easy to digest.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for your comments and question in there. Anybody else? Any questions? I'm going to go to the chat.
I can see there's some questions in the chat. Yeah.
Want me to read out?
Go on, you read them, and then I don't feel like I'm talking to myself.
Yeah. I'll just go. So Lauren, quick one from me. We do have some 0-hour bank staff, which we love, because having a pool of staff to cover sickness and annual leave is so useful. Will they disappear completely, or do I need to just make some changes to it? We never cancel shifts. We operate a 24/7 service. That's from Sandra, who runs a homelessness service, I happen to know.
I don't know. There's lots of debate about 0 hours contracts, because I think they get bad press, which is a shame, because when they're used very well and ethically, they work very well. So there's no plan at the moment for them to be scrapped completely. It is just about, and it will probably be the latter part of 2027 that these changes come into effect. So I think if you're looking for more guidance on those changes kind of around the point of the new financial year, hopefully there will be more information. But it is going to be things around, if you cancel shifts within a certain time frame, you would still be obliged to pay the person. So there could be some increased costs. It's also worth checking that you are doing things like incorporating an aspect of holiday pay in their pay, and showing that separately on the pay slips. so that you're staying on the right side of all of those kind of regulatory points of paying sufficiently, basically. Do you do the 12.07% holiday pay added on? Yeah, which is the typical route.
Great
Does that,
question.
does
Thanks,
that
Sandra.
answer that question? It's good that you're having to mime all your sort
You're
of
doing brilliantly,
responses.
Sandra. Loving it. Victoria, did you have one, or did I imagine it?
No, I just wanted to say actually that was really reassuring. It wasn't too quick. It wasn't scary.
Good.
And it is, so I did know about the changes in the sexual harassment policy from my previous job. So I think yeah, it's just quite clear that we just probably need to just make some tweaks to our policies that we already have in
Yeah.
place. So just to say, yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, thanks for not making it big and scary HR stuff. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, and it's making those changes in the policy and then communicating them out,
Yeah.
making sure people know what the changes are, and hopefully it isn't as scary as it seems when you see a big long list of sort of 50 things
Yeah.
changing. It can be
Yeah.
narrowed down.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, not scary is always good feedback.
And there's one other question in the
Yes, there's
chat
another
from
So,
question.
other one from Sandra. Another question from me. We don't have a flexible working policy at the Ferry project. It is something I want to put together and have started offering my senior leadership team the option. But the support staff are a front-facing role. They are here to support clients, so it makes flexible working a bit difficult. And I was sort of really interested in this as well, Sandra, obviously also having worked in the homelessness sector, but a lot of the charitable sector, but particularly homelessness, which is a sort of 24/7 service or very service driven. You know, we're not making coffees, we're not making kind of beer cans. Do you know what I mean? It's providing a service to people. My previous example, you'll know, would deliver very fixed 10 till 4 o'clock, 3-day facilitative workshops that made flexible working a real challenge. So I think it's a really great point that Sandra raises, kind of how that's going to work in the voluntary sector.
I think I think it is fine to have different rules or different policy applications for different roles, as long as you are really clear on the rationale as to why these roles need to be in place in these ways because they are doing X, Y, and Z. It might mean that you want to put some limits and restrictions around the flexibility that other staff have so that you don't have real disparity in who gets what. And I think potentially the easiest thing to do is to speak to the people in those roles and ask them what sorts of flexibility they would like and how would they see it working with the role that they do, because they will know it best. And actually it's much more likely they'll be on board with any changes you roll out then, because if you're asking them to work out how it would function and kind of troubleshoot it themselves, if they get to the point where they realize themselves it doesn't work, you've already got that buy-in. It's not being forced upon them, they've kind of come to that themselves. So seek input, but it might be that you can do some degree of flexibility. Your day can start an hour earlier or later and finish an hour earlier or later, because every little helps.
Yeah, and I really echo that. When we wrote our flexible working policy, it was definitely done from start to finish with the team's input, and they had thoughts and ideas about how, in what was a small, quite rigid service, it would work that I would never have had. Um, and it was kept quite equitable across the team, because there were some people who in more admin roles than service delivery roles, and that could have got very inequitable very quickly. But because I involved them in the conversation, they were already really alive to that, and they knew that they didn't want it to feel unfair, because they knew that would kind of cause a rift in the team. And so we were able to both be really back to clarity again, be really clear. These are our boundaries. This is what we need to run as a business. So these are the red lines, if you like. But outside of those, what could flexible working look like at this organisation? And it resulted in sort of changes in working patterns that were really, really positive, in terms of staff identifying days that were admin days, which meant they could be much more flexible on those days that weren't the service delivery days, where there was less flexibility. But again, the most valuable bit of the whole thing was their buy-in as we went through the process, as Lauren has said.
I think like you say, when a lot of your work, your delivery is frontline. I know with my team, because we all have caseloads per se, that people can actually fit those in as and where they want to. Obviously, they're still constrained by availability of venues and the availability of the families and the times that the children are available if they're in school and things like that. But it does give people some flexibility about they can put all their sessions into one day if they can, and then they can free up a day knowing that they have other things or need some flexibility. So it, as long as the only person who has to be obviously available is me throughout all of it as backup, but the rest of it can be it's quite fluid. And I think and then when a case closes and you get a new case in, you go, well, I don't want to put it there because that doesn't always quite work for me because I've got to pick children up or whatever. And then they can move it around. So we've found that it's an understanding, like you say, of where the red lines are. Like if we get a case and we've got to complete it by a certain time, then that has to be done. But where you put it, how you do it, and how you manage it, to a certain extent, is in conversation with me just to make sure that that's going to be safe and everything else. That allows for that flexibility within that. So I think we find it actually works very well, especially predominantly female team who all have different kind of other responsibilities and things like that. It tends to work really well.
Yeah, finding that flexibility. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Emma. Time for another question. Has anybody got any final questions? No? Brilliant. They're all lovely questions. I'm glad you all got a chance to ask that. So brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so we're just sort of in the process of wrapping up. I love a 15% solution as a wrap up. So what is a 15% solution? Here is what it is. It's think about something you want to move forward. So thinking about your reflections for today and what's come up for you, it's a question about what's your 15%. So if that 15% is the part you can act on right now without needing extra resources or permission. So what is it you feel you can go away and do after today? If anybody's got anything at all they want to share.
I think I'll just be looking through all our policies, gathering them all up,
Exactly.
and then just seeing what tweaks we need to make, really. And yeah,
Great.
and I have used ACAS website before, which is brilliant. So yeah, I always know that that's a good resource there.
Brilliant. So the things you can just get on and
Yeah,
look at. Brilliant.
yeah.
Thanks, Victoria. Lovely. Okay.
Yeah, and I would agree, same sort of thing. Just go in and have a quick double check of a few of our policies and just pencil in some tweaks into them that I'll come back to after annual leave.
Of course, most importantly. Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. So, again, thank you to Lauren and thank you to you for being here. As I said, I will send out the slides and I'll upload a recording as well. If you can bear to watch yourself on screen, if you need to, it will be there. So just coming up in terms of the Norfolk Leaders Club that I kind of have been sort of playing with, building slowly over the last year. If you get my newsletter, you'll know I've sort of taken something very big on called Pride in Place. It's a government initiative to spend 20 million pounds in 250 places in England, and I'm the chair for one of those places in West Norwich. So putting together a board and coming up with an investment plan that involves the community to spend 20 million is, you'll probably understand, quite a big job. I call it a job, it's unpaid, so that's the fun bit. So what the reason I'm telling you that is it is brilliant, but it also means that the Norfolk Leaders Club, I kind of wanted to really get going this year, but sometimes life has other ideas and other opportunities come along. So it will be slightly more muted than I'd hoped. Having said that, I'm still going to be doing podcasts, probably less regularly. I'm entering into another year of partnership with Good Finance. In short, they exist to raise awareness about social investment for charities and social enterprises. So any events, podcasts, webinars that I do going forward might have a social investment angle. But even if you're not looking to borrow, because that's what social investment is, it enables you to borrow to build your business. I'm hoping to bring really relevant content to that, to look at what charities and social enterprises are doing, not just with investment, but doing innovatively to strengthen their impact and strengthen their organisations. So I'll keep you notified about those. As I say, probably an event, probably another webinar, and certainly a podcast. And there'll be some case studies and social media and things. I also do sauna and support, which, as I've said, is it's a bit random. Next one is next Wednesday, the 10th of June. So if you ever want to join me for that, it's just a really nice space just to take time out if you're not in Cape Verde or somewhere else. So that is it from me today. It leaves it sort of me just to say again, finally, thank you for joining us this morning. I think we've got a little bit of time back. What's the time? Yep. I think you've got 7 minutes back. So hopefully it gives you time to put the kettle on before the next meeting. And I really hope to see you all again soon.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much.
Very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you. Bye.